Viewers, welcome back to the Personal Injury Law Show. Because we have had the good fortune of getting Ted Dorman on the show, we won't be doing the mailbag this week. Now, Ted, in this case of De Young, what were some of the things that the court looked at to determine liability on the council?
They looked at whether or not the council had conducted a risk assessment of activities around that bin, which the council had not. And the fact that they didn't was pointed to as a problem in that if they had conducted a risk assessment, they would have probably identified the risk of people throwing TVs with cords with sharp ends in them as a risk to their customers, and they might have done something about it.
And Nuncio, to add to that, you went out to quite a few different sites.
Yes, yeah. Look, there's loads of transfer stations around the country and the state, and I think we went to over 20 just to get, I suppose, pictures and depictions of different setups, and they're all different to this one in question.
And they were safer.
Yeah, they were, and then from there, obviously we got an expert involved, such as Ted, to, I suppose, comment upon the different setups and what this particular council could have done in this situation. And there was one thing that came from it, was that all they simply needed was a sign to warn customers of the risk of, I suppose, cords flicking up in their eyes. So a $25 sign was enough to defeat the...
Or what they could have done, Ted, is have the bin so that you're putting it in instead of flicking it up.
That's right. The bin was flushed. Part of the problem here, I think, was the bin itself wasn't flush with the ramp that came up in the
You know why? They were scared that people would fall in.
That's right. So there was another problem there.
But that's where then you probably just needed a bar, and that could have prevented it.
That's exactly right.
You know, it didn't take a lot to change the setup of this, and it didn't cost a lot. And I think that's why the court generally found in the plaintiff's favour. But just quickly, Tony, that jury found in favour of the plaintiff, and then still it was appealed, but the appeal was set aside. Set aside.
Negligence. Let's get on to another case. This is an interesting one. A lady goes to visit some family friends. She parks in the driveway. There's a lino on the ground. The garage door's open. The light's not working, so it's reasonably dark. It's about dusk. There's water on the lino and screeting, which is like little rocks.
Yeah.
She walks in with the dampness and the screeting. She falls over and badly damages her shoulder. What happened there, no?
Oh, look, this case sort of resolved, but it was found that basically the defendant, who was just an occupier of their own home, were negligent in failing to provide a safe premises for a guest or a friend, I think it was in this case.
Yeah. It was. Yeah. And what were some of the key elements in this case, Ted?
Well, that's a really interesting one, because there's a number of elements all chucked into one the sort of things that we'd be looking for. Lighting being one, a slippery surface being two, with the water on the lino surface. And the third thing, which would increase the risk further still, would be the presence of the screeding, or the small little rocks, as I understand what screeding is. How
do you prove if something's slippery when wet? What do you do?
There's a series of tests that are set down by an Australian standard, and there's equipment and methodology that you need to follow. And that will tell you as to whether or not a specific surface is safe or otherwise, or not safe, when wet as well as when dry. So there's two series of tests there.
Ted, would this plaintiff still have established a breach if there was no pebbles or rocks on the lino?
It is possible, yes, definitely. And that may come back to whether or not the surface, the lino surface, was slippery when wet alone, so without the rocks themselves.
This testing you're referring to, Nuncio, is that conclusive? I mean, is it going to shoot you down if they find that it's still safe with water?
I think if they find it's still safe with water, I think you'd have difficulty here, because where's then the danger, where's the risk to the plaintiff? So I think that's why these tests are quite, I suppose, comprehensive at times. But generally it's unlikely they won't come from the
Are they conclusive?
Well, they're one piece of the puzzle, in the overall risk attached to a given situation.
Then you've got to look at the lino to see how worn it was.
That's right. And the lighting as well, for example, which might itself lead to a trip or a slip on its own.
And I think this is just a lesson for, I suppose, viewers. You should have public liability insurance at your own home, because things like this can happen. And look, you don't want to be sued, and look, it's not personal if you do get sued, but why would you want to be covering out of your own pocket? And in this case, luckily the defendant had insurance which covered it.
We've been talking about lifting incidents. We've been talking about slipping incidents. What about repetition, Ted? Can you give me some facts about a particular case where a lady was working in a factory and there was an enormous amount of repetition? Tell me a bit about this case.
Yeah, well, this lady was working in a warehouse down in Port Melbourne, so locally, and it was for a business that was involved in, as I understand it from memory, like newsagent type materials, that sort of thing. Her job was to pick the pens, pencils, whatever else from the shelves across to a nearby conveyor and make up orders, essentially. So she was picking and packing all day. Not necessarily heavy weights, but she was picking and packing all day. As a result of the repetitious nature of her work, she's suffered injury.
And she's sustained a very, very nasty back nudge. She's had operations on it. There's talk of her having further surgery. The case has settled out of court, so I can't give the names. But this repetition, it happens a lot, doesn't it?
Oh, look, in a lot of these, I suppose, with factory workers and labourers, I said a lot of things that you do are just, you do it hundreds of times a day, and you think it's innocuous at times, but you've got to, I suppose, draw your attention to it, especially those employees, because it can lead to some really nasty injuries.
Apart from a risk assessment, Ted, what could the employer have done to minimise or reduce the risk to this plaintiff of being injured?
The first thing that you can do when it comes to repetition is reduce the exposure that person or employee has to repetition by introducing a system of rotation, so that people they're moving to different jobs using different muscle groups is the way we normally recommend it.
And having probably more breaks, smaller breaks, but on a regular basis.
Yes, that's another thing. And the other thing is, of course, to look at the work system itself. So to look at the shelving, to look at the that she had to pick from, because heights introduce awkward postures and bending, which in combination with the repetition can lead to injury.
And isn't there also an interesting point that perhaps two employees could have done the same job, where one did 4 hours and then went off to a different job?
Yes.
And another one did 4 hours and went off to the other job.
Is that an economic issue though? You know, employees don't want to spend the extra dollars.
Well, it doesn't matter. They're both doing the same job, aren't they, Ted?
Well, that's the funny thing about a lot of these incidents. You find that the answers are not necessarily expensive, and sometimes they actually might even lead to a productivity saving.
Isn't it common sense, Ted? I'm saying common sense.
Well, if it was common sense, they wouldn't pay an expert for it, Tony. But, but it is. A lot of it is common sense.
Is it fair to say that there's not enough risk assessments made, Lawrence?
I think that's a very accurate statement to say. There's not enough going around. That's why I think it's highlighted now in through these like work cover ads and the like.
Yeah,
this is a very popular topic, and we'll have to come back to it in the future. Lawrence, thanks for coming on board.
Thanks, Tony.
Ted, thank you very much for your expertise, and we'll get you back in the future. And viewers, as usual, thanks for watching. Please stay tuned for further episodes, and please stay safe. Thank you.